Thomas shivered. He felt an inexplicable chill that seemed to emanate from within, as if his very soul was trembling. The air in his studio was still, yet a cold dread crept up his spine. It was as though the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. His masterpiece, a vibrant town square teeming with life, sat on the easel. It had once been a source of pride and joy, a testament to his skill and imagination, except it wasn't vibrant anymore. The colours that once danced with light now seemed muted, as if a shadow had passed over them. A shadow had fallen upon it, a crack splitting the heart of the square, a darkness seeping out. It was as if the painting itself was wounded, bleeding an inky blackness.
He'd painted with joy, with hope, but now it felt like a premonition. Each brushstroke, once filled with optimism, now seemed to carry a hidden warning, a chilling whisper of the future. The crack in the painting seemed to speak to him, a silent harbinger of doom. Thomas tried to shake off the unease. He told himself it was just his imagination, a trick of the light, but the feeling persisted. He was known for his whimsical style, his paintings bringing joy to many. His art was a refuge, a place where people could escape the harshness of reality, yet he couldn't ignore the icy grip on his heart. The fear was real, palpable, and it gnawed at him relentlessly.
The crack in the painting seemed to pulse, the shadow to writhe. It was alive, a malevolent force that defied explanation. It felt real, too real. This wasn't just a painting, it was something more, something sinister. This wasn't just paint and canvas, this was a portal, a window into a dark and foreboding future. This was a vision, a terrifying glimpse into the future, a future that he was powerless to change.
He paced his studio, a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Was he going mad, or was this some kind of curse, a punishment for daring to capture such beauty on canvas? His gaze fell upon his paint-stained hands. These hands, once creators of joy, now seemed tainted, marked by the darkness that had invaded his work. Could he, a simple painter, really be cursed with such a dreadful gift? The thought was absurd, yet he couldn't shake it. He looked back at the painting, the answer echoing in the ominous crack that marred the once joyful scene. It was a reminder of the darkness that now overshadowed his life.
He had to do something. He couldn't just stand by and watch as his vision unfolded into reality. He had to warn someone. But who would believe him? Who would take the word of a painter over the evidence of their own eyes? The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through him, but also a steely resolve. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. He had to act. He wouldn't stand by and watch his vision come to life. He had to find a way to change it, to alter the course of the future he had seen. He had to act, had to change what he had seen. But how? The question gnawed at him, a relentless echo in his mind. And who would believe him? The doubt was overwhelming, but he knew he couldn't let it stop him. He had to try, for the sake of the future.
The town square buzzed with life, just like in Thomas's painting. Children chased pigeons, their laughter echoing in the afternoon sun. Market stalls overflowed with colourful fabrics and fresh produce, but Thomas saw none of it. His eyes were fixed on the cobblestones, searching, dreading.
He'd rushed to the square, his masterpiece clutched in his hands. He had to show someone, warn them, but the faces around him blurred into a sea of indifference. Who was he to disrupt their day with his visions of doom?
Fear choked his words, his hands trembled. The canvas felt heavy with the burden of his secret. A cold wind swept across the square, making him shudder. The laughter of children faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. The shadows seemed to lengthen, stretching towards the very spot that was fractured in his painting.
Was it his imagination, or was the square growing darker?
The air grew thick with a palpable tension. Thomas looked around, his heart pounding against his ribs. People were starting to notice, their cheerful chatter dying down, replaced by confused murmurs. He had to do something, had to say something, but the words wouldn't come out, stuck in his throat like dry leaves.
It's happening, isn't it?
A voice whispered beside him. Thomas spun around, startled. It was a young girl, her eyes wide with a strange knowing. She stood there, almost ethereal in the dim light, her presence both comforting and unsettling. She couldn't be older than 10, yet her gaze held an unnerving maturity, mirroring the fear he saw in the reflection of the canvas. It was as if she had seen things far beyond her years, things that no child should ever witness. He stared at her, speechless. The room seemed to close in around them, the air thick with unspoken words and shared dread. How could she possibly understand? How could this child see what he saw, feel what he felt? The questions swirled in his mind, but no answers came. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask, but she silenced him with a slight raise of her hand. Her small gesture held a surprising authority, commanding his silence.
I see it too, she whispered, her gaze fixed on the spot where the painting depicted the ominous crack. The darkness, it's coming. Her voice was barely audible, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 fears.
You see it in the painting? His voice trembled, a mix of hope and terror.
The girl nodded, her eyes never leaving the spot. Her intense focus was almost hypnotic, drawing him into the same dark vision. She pointed a slender finger towards the canvas. The crack seemed to pulse, as if alive, as if it were a wound in the very fabric of their reality.
The crack, she breathed. It's getting wider. Her words were a chilling confirmation of his worst fears.
Thomas's blood ran cold. He wasn't alone. This wasn't madness. The shared vision was a terrifying reality. It was real, and terrifyingly so. The implications were staggering, the fear almost paralyzing. Relief warred with a growing sense of urgency. He wasn't imagining things. He wasn't alone. But the shared vision brought with it a heavy burden. But this shared vision wasn't a comfort. It was a call to action. They had to act. And quickly. They had to do something, and quickly, before the darkness in the painting bled into their reality. The painting was no longer just art, it was a harbinger of doom. The fate of the town, their fate, rested on their shoulders. The weight of responsibility was almost crushing. And they were just a painter and a child. Yet, in that moment, they were bound by a shared destiny, a shared sight that demanded action.
We have to make them believe, Thomas said, his voice firming with newfound resolve. He knew that the fate of the town depended on it. Every word he spoke carried the weight of their future, and he could not afford to falter now. The crowd needed to see the urgency in his eyes, to feel the conviction in his voice.
How? She asked, her voice small yet steady. Her question hung in the air, a challenge and a plea wrapped into one. She represented the doubt that lingered in the hearts of many, the uncertainty that threatened to unravel their fragile hope.
Thomas looked around the square, now eerily quiet, a sense of foreboding settling over the townsfolk. The once bustling square was now a sea of anxious faces, each person grappling with the gravity of the situation. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the usual lively chatter that filled the air. He unrolled the canvas, his masterpiece now a terrifying prophecy. The painting depicted a scene of chaos and destruction, a vision that had haunted his dreams for weeks. It was a warning, a desperate attempt to make them see what he had seen.
This, he declared, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness. His proclamation was met with a mix of shock and disbelief. He could see the skepticism in their eyes, but he pressed on, determined to make them understand. This is what I see. This is what's coming. His words were a stark reminder of the impending doom that loomed over them. He needed them to grasp the severity of the situation, to realize that their very survival depended on their belief in his vision.
People stopped, their eyes drawn to the painting, their faces etched with confusion and fear. The image before them was a stark contrast to the reality they knew, a glimpse into a possible future that none of them wanted to face.
Madness, someone muttered, but Thomas pressed on, his voice gaining strength. He could not let their doubt deter him. He had to break through their disbelief, to make them see the truth that lay before them. He pointed to the widening crack, the encroaching shadow. It was a physical manifestation of the danger that threatened their town, a tangible sign that could not be ignored. He described his vision, his words painting a picture of impending doom. He spoke of the darkness that would engulf them, the chaos that would ensue if they did not act. His voice was a beacon of urgency, a call to action that could not be ignored. The girl stood beside him, her small hand gripping his, her gaze unwavering, lending a silent credence to his desperate plea. Her presence was a reminder of what was at stake, the future that hung in the balance.
The skepticism in their eyes was a tangible thing, but as he spoke, as his voice rose in desperation, a flicker of doubt appeared in their eyes. He could see the walls of disbelief beginning to crumble, the seeds of doubt taking root. He could see it, a spark of belief igniting in the face of the undeniable fear that emanated from the heart of the painting. a fear that mirrored his own. It was a small victory, but a crucial one. He had to nurture that spark, to fan it into a flame of conviction. He had to make them understand, make them see. His words were his only weapon, his conviction his only shield. He poured his heart into every sentence, hoping to reach the hearts of those who listened. The fate of the town rested on it. Their future was in his hands, and he would not let them down. He would fight for their belief, for their survival until his last breath.